Hello, everyone. I'm Ashley, and I lead Financial Narrative. I'm very excited to have you all here today. This is one of my favorite events of the year where we unveil the findings from our annual salary survey. And one of the reasons I think it's so important is because we are all dealing with hiring, questions about our own careers, how we're promoting our team and making sure that they are well compensated and going to want to stay in the places they are, or how we're promoting them and moving them forward. Um, and that is about a lot of different factors, right? It's not just about salary, although that is very important. In many cases, it's also about what are those outside ways that we're motivating our teams, um, and the things that we're doing to help them want to stay or be part of our organizations for the long term. So today we'll be releasing our salary survey. I'm very excited and very thankful to our research partner, Opinium. Opinium has been partnering with us on this report for several years now. They are an award-winning strategic insight agency with global reach. They have offices in New York and in London, and they are fantastic. They brought their expertise in financial financial markets communications and research to this report, as they have to all of our research throughout the years since Financial Narrative was founded. So I will start by introducing our partner from Opinium, Alyssa Nightingale. She's the global head of financial services research and a partner at Opinium, and she's the head of insights for Financial Narrative. Welcome, Alyssa.
Hi, Ashley. Great to be here. So I'm Alyssa Nightingale, Global Head of Financial Services Research at Opinium. So specializing in financial services for most of my 20-year career. And I'm also Head of Insights for the Financial Narrative. So I was responsible for the analysis for this year's survey.
Yeah. And next up, Jamie. Jamie is the CEO and founder of Monday Talent, a longtime friend of Financial Narrative, and has really great insights across the marketing and communications industry.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Jamie. And last but certainly not least, Susan Thomas, who is a partner at Heyman Associates, one of the leading executive recruiters in the field today, and again, a longtime friend of Financial Narrative. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here, Ashley.
Yes. So as we dive into this topic, Alexa, I would love, I think we got to put Alexa back on stage, but Alexa, I would love for you to just give us a little bit of an overview of how the report came together, some of the methodology behind it, so that our audience knows what they're dealing with in terms of the types of information we're about to share with them.
Yeah, sure. So this is the third year that we've run this salary survey, so providing insights on salaries, hiring practices, and employee retention within the financial marketing communications industry. This year, we spoke to over 100 marcomms leaders, mainly from the UK and the US, representing different sizes of organizations and different industries within the FS sector. And the survey was conducted online earlier this year from February through to March.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexa. Before we dive into the survey findings in more detail, though, I think it's kind of nice to set the stage, and Jamie and Susan are particularly well placed to do that because they're seeing the comings and goings, who's looking for jobs, who's looking for new team members, et cetera, across our industry. So Susan and Jamie, can you start with just your overall impressions with the job market today and of the talent market today? And I'll start with Jamie here because I don't know, he's on the upper side of my screen.
Honestly, actually, it depends what hour of the day you ask me, to be honest. It's one of the most unpredictable job markets I've worked in my near 20 years of recruiting. So the trend is the unpredictability, really. But if we drill down a little bit, I certainly think that there's been maybe less of those sort of C-suite roles in our world. There's been a lot of hiring of people at sort of secondary or tertiary level. There has been in recent months a maybe I'm stating the obvious, but in terms of industry verticals, in more on the service-based industries, financial services, technology, those sort of areas. If you're in CPG, for example, and if you're not being affected by tariffs, you'll probably be being conservative anyway. And then we haven't seen, and I think our data that we're about to present will underline that we haven't seen huge growth in salary since the sort of heyday of 21 and 22 during the Great Resignation. So there's definitely some trends, but it really does depend when you ask, because the market moves quickly. That said, and I think Susan will agree, it's actually, we're busier than we were this time last year. It's not all doom and gloom. There is some sort of green shoots of opportunity happening as well.
Absolutely. Susan, what are you seeing across the industry?
Yeah, similar. So at the beginning of this year, we had a much slower start than we did last year. We were very busy at the beginning of last year and then dropped off. And this year it's been the opposite, that it was slow at the start of the year. Enough to think, gosh, is this actually going to pick up again? Because I feel as if there was just so much ambiguity and everyone was waiting, and then we seem to still be waiting. But it has really picked up just recently. And I feel as if, two sectors that we saw drop off dramatically over the last few years, technology and financial services, have come back. So it's been really interesting. I would agree that we've seen, it's interesting both from a candidate and then from a client perspective, we have seen fewer of the C-suite roles. That last year at this time, we were doing a lot of very big roles for very well-known companies. And I feel as if what Jamie said, we've experienced as well, which is it's been a little bit more of sort of the person below that, or even the person below that. And actually clients reaching out to us and saying, will you help us with these other roles? These are the more difficult roles for us at the moment than the senior roles. And at the same time, then candidates coming to us and saying, where are the senior roles? There isn't enough choice out there. And I think the other thing we saw at the beginning of the year was a few different, and not just for ourselves, but for other companies as well, roles going to search and then being pulled. And that coming from the senior leadership of an organization in several situations, either a reorganization, a change of heart. And I think some of that might be, so for example, one soundbite would be, no, let's wait. Let's go with agency for one more year and really proof concept of this hire. So that was a little disconcerting to see a few roles pulled, but as we have both said, it's picked up a little bit since then.
And just to jump on that as well, so some of the roles going, if it is a senior role, the number two gets it as well. They sort of go to market, and then they see, the probably the more risk adverse choice, take the number two. They know the business, it probably might be cheaper. So I've certainly seen clients go to market and then bump up number two to the top job as well.
Yeah, so a little bit more internal movement as opposed to some of those top level jobs coming open instead, which creates the situation that Susan was talking about, where clients are saying, hey, we don't want to hire for that CMO. We need to hire for the next in command because we just moved somebody into the CMO role. It's a little bit of a question of, are people just getting more comfortable with the lack of predictability, or are they sort of just having to move forward whether the predictability is there or not? I think, at some point you have to stop waiting, and that's maybe what we're seeing a little bit in the market now. But Alexa, let's jump over to you. I know you have a couple of different findings you're going to share with us throughout this. And of course, everyone wants to know about money. So let's start on some money questions.
Yeah, so one of the sort of key themes that we saw through the survey this year was some signs of wage stagnation. So when we asked members if they'd received a salary increase within the last year, we actually saw a slight decline in the trend of people saying that they'd seen an increase compared to 2024, so 78% versus 83%. I think where we saw the starkest difference, though, was actually in the average salary increases that people experienced. So 3.6% in 2025 compared to 4.1% last year. And actually, we also saw that kind of a good number of the people that we surveyed said that they had seen a real or perceived lack of wage growth within their organisation. Having said that, though, that hasn't dampened satisfaction. So we're still seeing kind of satisfaction levels around compensation kind of maintaining this year compared to last year. In actual fact, we saw a slight directional increase. So perhaps, potentially kind of people recognising that it is quite a difficult climate right now.
Absolutely. So the stagnation is a little bit of a question mark, and honestly, I've been hearing a bit about that from our membership as well, and from people who are job seeking, et cetera. And Jamie and Susan both mentioned it, right? That we're not seeing these astronomical sort of moves upward. So Jamie and Susan, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing sort of among employers if we're seeing wages kind of stay the same? What are you recommending in terms of, making people want to make that move, things like that? What else is there? Susan, I'll start with you this time.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a good question. I think that we are seeing a lot more attention to corporate culture, and a reflection of that actually has been the emphasis on internal communications roles, which of course have been all about employee engagement and working out how an organization can make itself a place that is a draw to talent, and then how that retention being, the next place of attention. So we've heard a lot more interest from, I'm just thinking it's all sorts of organizations, not just financial services organizations, but how do we actually do better at recruiting the right people and retaining those people by them coming to us and saying, we need these kind of internal communications people on board. So there's certainly a turn toward what is the corporate culture, how are we recognizing our talent, what's our flexibility? But I think you're also seeing almost like a creative conflict in that area, because many organizations are going back to 5 days a week in the office. And so then it becomes even harder to work out how they're going to bring people into the organization. And you're, in a sense, you're recreating culture that was disrupted by there being either work from home or hybrid situations. So I think we're in a flux at the moment to a certain extent, and it's quite difficult for organizations to really work out what to do, when to do it. And I think they're all looking to one another. What's the competition doing? How are we doing versus?
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, what are you seeing?
Is it in terms of salaries as well? Is that, yeah?
Well, so I mean, in terms of if we're seeing kind of across the board that wages are not increasing, I'm very curious, what are organizations offering that are making people want to make the move or helping them with retention across the board?
Yeah, Susan touched on some really strong points there as well. There's definitely been clients that, I'm dealing with a pretty large offer at the moment, and we're quite far apart in salary. So the client is looking to, bring in new incentives around bonus and long-term investment plans and incentive plans, and sometimes a sign-on bonus is happening as well. Flexibility, to Susan's point, is something that people are willing to factor in versus within reason a higher base as well. So clients are certainly trying to get creative in terms of putting packages together, and the 5 days a week thing, as Susan said, is making that problematic, I think, for a lot of people. But there is a little bit of an attitude, and we try and educate our clients. Is that it's we hold the cards at the moment, so you either take it or you don't, because there's been a lack of roles. Again, across levels, not just the senior level, there is this sort of attitude that we can probably squeeze the candidate a little bit more than a couple of years ago. But however, the top candidates won't necessarily put up with that, because they know their worth as well. So there's a little bit of push, a little bit of friction there, when it's coming to offer stage, because the clients feel that they can get a bargain, but top candidates aren't willing to go down, especially if salaries and all that stuff go up next year. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Alexa mentioned, and it's part of our report too, that we are seeing people still seem satisfied with their wages, even though they're not really going up. So I'm curious, for either of you, Susan, if you want to start, what do we attribute that satisfaction to? If it's not about the money, then what all is helping there?
Well, I think this is, I was thinking about this. We discussed this last year. There were several elements, and because what we're discussing is lots of different, it's a mosaic, isn't it, of the people who are moving and commanding extraordinary salaries, or companies that are still willing to pay extraordinary salaries, and then those organizations that aren't, and the people who are happy. So the people who are happy, I think what you've got is a situation of sort of, I can't really move to the kind of situation I'd like to, so I'm very happy with where I am for the moment, and it is actually about quality of life. So I think one of the things we talked about last year is if you have a partnership where one person can stay home because they take a slightly lower salary, that can save that couple, one, being able to have that second salary, and then all sorts of other benefits in terms of being able to run a family in a way that we, prior to the pandemic, we all had lost an opportunity to a certain extent. So, for example, a commute. I can live in a much less expensive area and have my children in a more rural school, perhaps, if I've got one person at home, the other person doing the long commute, or if one person is in a more rural place and commuting to there. So I think that's where people will say, in fact, we've seen situations where we had two finalists for a role who both essentially one was offered the role and they said, could you please come in for 3 days a week? And she said, absolutely not. It was 2, or I don't take the job. And there, that was an opportunity to take a higher salary, essentially a much more high profile role. And the second candidates turned it down for exactly the same reason. So 3 versus 2 days, both candidates said no to 3 days a week versus 2, and were willing to give up that extra salary for it. And the conversation was very definitely, for one, it was a woman in the first situation, a gentleman in the second. And for him, it was a sit down with the family and the degree to which he would not see the family. So I think that's one of the things. The other, I think, is a little bit of a feeling of sort of, this doesn't feel safe. I don't feel as safe moving in this market. People have seen others be let go. And I think that is a time when there's a little bit of cling to your seat and stay where you are known and you have, sort of equity, if you like.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, so you mentioned, people sort of deciding to not take the big job or not take the role where they were going to get a really good increase or a bump or something like that. For these lifestyle reasons, are you seeing that across the board, that people are really kind of drawing hard lines and having different expectations in an environment where they're not seeing huge raises?
We're not. We're seeing a mix. We're seeing people who are also coming to us and saying, I am now at that stage in life where I can go anywhere, I can relocate finally. Yep. Complete mix. I really don't think it's one trend versus other. It's a group of different trends.
Yeah, it's such a personal decision based on your circumstances as well, because you speak to people who kids have just gone to college, so they've got that flexibility. Others, they're like, this is the last 2 years of high school, there's zero chance I'm moving, and I want to see my kids when I can for the next couple of years as well. So but it's a factor, there's no doubt about that, but it's not sort of, as Susan says, it's not a trend in either direction. That said, people who've got used to the flexibility, so a lot of them don't want to move away from that as well. So we're certainly seeing that.
Absolutely. Well, so let's move into our next topic, Alexa. This is an interesting one. So we saw actually probably some of our biggest shifts in the whole report were related to gender pay gap and both awareness and reality of gender pay gap in some of our companies. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So this is perhaps a kind of bit more of a worrying trend that we saw within the survey. But this year we saw that kind of members are increasingly aware of gender pay gaps, and particularly kind of when looking at that across organisation, that's particularly stark, that increase in those kind of mid-sized organisations between 200 and 5,000 employees. So it's something that kind of stood out for us within the survey, but also we also saw that that was reflected in the reported salaries as well. So when we looked at the differences between men and women, we saw kind of that increase in the difference rising to 14% compared to 4% in 2024 when it comes to salaries. And then that difference being even more stark when it comes to bonuses. So a 50% difference this year compared to 27% last year. So yeah, a little bit of a worrying trend, I'd say.
Yeah, and we're seeing it so not only in perception, but also in what we've collected as actual salaries, actual bonuses, that those have all shifted pretty significantly in 12 months, actually. So let's talk about that a little bit. Not a trend that I personally love. But Jamie, I'll go to you first. Do we think that we're seeing this kind of reversal? And do you think it's more pronounced in certain sectors like finance and financial technology potentially?
I think the assumption would be those industries which have traditionally been dominated by men would fall back to that rather depressing statistic after decades of very, very slow but trending in the right direction. My take on it, if I'm trying to be constructive of why it's happened, obviously I think it's appalling. It's in times of where businesses are squeezed, where it's very where we've got significant headwinds, where we have a government who doesn't know how to run an economy. We tend to fall back to roles that we feel are will allow for growth and allow for profits and drive profits, which tends to be roles that are traditionally seen for men. Again, don't agree with that, but trying to find some constructive.
Falling back to old patterns potentially.
Yeah, so roles that are sales growth, chief revenue officer roles, sales positions, etc. That sort of area, and we tend to pay those in these kind of markets. We tend to pay higher salaries for those people and also higher bonuses for those individuals as well. So that's one reason why that may happen, other than sort of other obvious ones of chauvinistic and those kind of opinions as well. So yeah, it's very depressing. But we do see in these when we have significant headwinds, we look at roles that traditionally men hold, and that's why they're getting paid more. But again, don't agree with it. But that's one idea.
Yeah. Susan, what are you seeing? I mean, what are you thinking are causes, and are you seeing it more specifically in finance?
No, not seeing it more specifically in one area versus another. I think as the eternal optimist, all I can think is that the best case scenario is that what we have is so if it is that women are, predominantly the ones who are taking that role that allows you to stay in the workforce, but you're taking a slightly lower salary, you're so pleased to still be in the workforce that you're accepting that lower salary. Yeah. And one hopes that that's a joint decision. Sometimes I know it's the other way around. And I just wonder, that would be progression. I always fear that we pendulum swing as a human consciousness, and we think that if something that we moved toward didn't work, that we have to undo it completely, go back to what we were doing previously. When we moved away from that previously for good reason, we don't seem to be able to land in the middle. So that's my one hope, is that the best case scenario is that we're actually keeping some people in the workforce who would otherwise not be able to continue in the workforce by having flexible working and lower salaries. The sad thing, I think, is if it truly is that it's just my face value that gets me the higher bonus, well, then that is even more difficult. And I do hear similar sound bites to what Jamie was talking about, which is, well, this person is not an investment professional, so we couldn't possibly pay them the same structure as we do. And yet we know that there is such a real ROI for these roles, for comms and marketing, such tangible results. So these are very disappointing parts that I still hear, that I think, oh gosh, I so want that quashed. It seems incredibly old and archaic to me that that's not been recognized. Almost, there are beautiful analogies for that. It's a whole other conversation in a way, but I think there's a little bit of hope that we've got people staying who would otherwise maybe have had to have gone out of the workforce or set up their own firm and be consulting, as opposed to staying in the workforce. But I don't have data. That's completely anecdotal.
Yes, well, I mean, with any hope, by this time next year, we'll all be on this stage talking about a slight reversal of that trend, or a big reversal of that trend. On the subject of reversing it and kind of going back to the more optimistic point of view on this, I'm curious if, you both have a really strong view across the industry. And I'm curious if you've seen organizations that have programs in place or sort of policies or who are asking the right questions to sort of combat not only the gender pay gap, but also maybe hiring practices that would discriminate against underrepresented minorities, things like that. Do you see any examples of companies who are, doing what they can to do it right, if you will?
You certainly do, but people are being very quiet about it at the moment. It is not the market where you're screaming and shouting about this sort of thing. At Monday Talent, we have a real focus on diversity and equity inclusion in our hiring policies, as a lot of recruiters do. So a lot of clients come to us when they don't want talent. Basically, it doesn't look like me. But it's whispered at the end of the conversation rather than being the thing a couple of years ago that it was the first thing that we spoke about. So we haven't moved wholesale away from that, because businesses understand that diversity is profitable. That's undisputable. So they still want that, and that's diversity of thought, background, experience. It's not just gender or colour. So businesses haven't moved away from that, but they're just not shouting about it. Therefore, they're probably not. I don't know if there's many new initiatives coming into play, but a lot of businesses aren't necessarily going away from those initiatives that they had. They're just not publicly advertising it.
Yeah, I think there's a marked difference between 2 years ago, with every single company asking for a diverse slate, to absolute silence in terms of that ask of late. Really remarkable. The only other thing I would say, I think you were asking very specifically about what we see in the market that really looks as if it would accommodate not just diverse hiring and keeping diversity in the workforce, but also pay scales and managing pay scales and between genders. So the one thing I have seen, but sadly not in financial services and a German company, not a US company, is having such complex and comprehensive pay scale that for example, our candidate in the process of not coming from another corporation was coming from we're coming from government basically, and so was essentially trebling their salary by going into a private role, because instead of saying, oh, well, this is a bargain, this is an individual, because this was a woman and this was a diverse candidate, instead of saying, oh, excellent, we only have to up that compensation by the following amount, which sadly one does also see, this was an organization that said this individual will be coming in at this level and therefore will be paid this amount with this amount of bonus, this amount of LTI, etc. So just doing the right thing was very lovely to see. Other than that, anecdotally, all I have seen is great leaders saying, I really want to hire a diverse team in the following way. I would add, sadly, in financial services, that is often because one can achieve that so much more in comms and marketing than you can throughout the rest of the organization. And so you're trying to compensate for something, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a greater sense of belonging in that organization, because the ratio of those individuals to the rest of the organization will still be so low. And then finally, it would be, one thing I have seen is really powerful leaders who are diverse in some form or another, doing a really good job of supporting this, being those professionals who we talk to, comms and marketing professionals, who've done a phenomenal job because of the very skills that they have of promoting themselves and their diverse teams in organizations and helping to move that agenda forward in their organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, across the board from the financial narrative perspective, we do see, because we work in marketing and comms, we do see a lot of that diversity. But to your point, that does not mean that it exists in the larger financial organizations across the board. Marketing and comms maybe draws in a little bit more of a variety of people. And I have had a lot of private conversations for obvious reasons. Financial narrative is not putting huge DEI conversations on stage at this moment, but I have had a lot of private conversations with organizations that are still striving privately or kind of within the bounds that they can to push some of those initiatives forward. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that one for next year. Alexa, let's talk a little bit about hiring. I know that Susan and Jamie gave us a bit of an overview of what they're seeing in the market, which is actually pretty well reflected in the data that we were also able to put together.
Yeah, so despite some of the sort of the areas I talked about earlier around lower wage growth, actually employers are still investing in talent. So when asked how important is hiring to your organisation right now, over half of members said it was important, and that sort of trend has continued to increase from 2024. So certainly kind of not dampening kind of hiring anytime soon. And if we look on the next slide, though, we do see some differences between communications and marketing. So if we look back at the last 12 months in terms of kind of team changes, in terms of their size, we see that comms teams are very much kind of investing in increasing their teams. So 39% saying that they had increased their teams compared to just 27% within marketing. However, if we look at the next 12 months, we see that the opposite is true. So almost comms sort of scaling back their growth and now marketing taking the lead in increasing their size of teams. So again, sort of seeing a 40% increase for marketing compared to 24% for communication teams.
That's interesting. So marketing may be kind of having their comeback moment. I recall that last year, when we did this report last year, that was somewhat flipped. Comms was very much in the hiring seat, and as reflected in the data, marketing was not. And I will say that I've seen that reflected in just the roles that are coming across my desk as well. So we'll start with you, Jamie. So we have a lot of organizations who are prioritizing hiring, more than 50%. So that's good. Do we think this signals kind of an increase in confidence, or per our earlier conversation, is it just pent up demand at this point?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I wish it was sort of a change in the economy or the market, but I feel 23, end of 23, most of 24, we were sort of talking ourselves into a recession. It was a lot of businesses were being very conservative and either a lot of them overhired, overpaid, doubled down on areas like where do you remember NFTs and the metaverse and all that kind of stuff? We'll look back at that fondly. So I think a lot of companies got a little bit burned, overpaid. The big layoffs in tech, for example, was a correction rather than in the market. I think a lot of it. So I think we had that in 23, 24. It got to 25. The hope, no laughing in the back, was that Trump coming in would fire up the markets and get the economy going. That obviously hasn't happened. The exact opposite has happened and will continue to happen. But I think a lot of businesses were like, well, we need to get on with this. We can't stagnate for 2-3 years, and we have to hire. We have to grow. And we have to, maybe backfill positions that we did in 24, for example. So I feel it's probably more likely that than a sort of a sea change in the economy or the market. Although I prefer it to be that, of course. So it feels like we're riding that wave at the moment. But how sustainable that is, I'm not sure. But yeah, it feels like it's probably more like a result of what's happened previously than a positive reaction now.
It's interesting. Susan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think there's something else that's quite possible, and that is that a large number of organisations are having to diversify. So the market is incredibly competitive, and a lot of organisations, I mean, on the asset management side in particular, a lot of organisations are having to think deeply about, what are the different ways that we're going to, what are the different products and services that we can provide, and what are the different audiences that we haven't been, customer audiences we haven't been servicing in the past that we're now going to break into. And so I think some of that hiring is coming from new lines of business, diversifying. And then I also think it is realizing that we need to find different ways of connecting with people that are not traditional, that we haven't before. So you're hiring specialists to help you with sort of targeted approaches to new customer base or diversifying with an existing customer base. So On top of that, I would say that in general, I think maybe for some types of financial services organisation, this isn't true, but for the vast majority, and I'd be interested to know what we're looking at in terms of, who we're stacked up here. But I would say that there are several different categories where they have historically been understaffed in comms and marketing. And so then this is a market in which it continues to be the case that those organisations are beginning to move away from agency and hire full-time staff or build the capability that they have got because they're finally getting more and more educated about the value and the reward of having a comms function. I know organisations where communications has essentially been done off the side of the desk of somebody who is an investment professional, for example, for the longest time. And that might be true of a professional services organisation for a long time as well. There's a point at which that's unsustainable.
I think that's true. I think over the past, I think 5 years or so, I think 2020 really gave comms their moment when everyone realized that if you didn't have a comms person, you were in a bit of trouble. But as we look at marketing specifically, almost half of the people who responded to this survey said the marketing team had 1 to 5 unfilled roles, so multiple unfilled roles. But we're not seeing a huge talent shortage in the market, I don't think. But I'm curious: is this a sign of there's a shortage in specific types of talent? Is it unrealistic hiring expectations? Is it a money question? What do we think is causing them to have that many unfilled roles when it seems like there's some talent out there? I think. Susan, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think it is one of those situations where, the best talent is the best talent. And so people, we have seen a lot of clients trying to go to search on their own. And between their wish to keep compensation levels down, and yet they want to find the best talent, I think that often there's this point where they feel we're not seeing the talent we expected for the compensation we want to pay, and then they doubt their knowledge of the market for those reasons. So I think it's just that in any situation, in a good market or a poor market, talent is talent. The most talented individuals are the most talented individuals, and you have competition from all angles for those individuals. So that will never go away, even in a market where there are really talented individuals looking and have been looking in some cases for a long time. I can't tell you the number of searches where it has been exactly what you said, Ashley, where there are such specific skills sought for that particular organization, whether it be technical skills or the particular leadership skills or the particular verticals or comms or marketing. And I think that clients have felt that this was a market in which they could really they could look and keep looking until they found that individual that met all of those needs. And it's been true. We have been successful in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, what do you think? You have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's all of the things that you mentioned, Ashley, and completely agree with Susan. I think some of these roles, there might be a bit of lip service there. It's like, yeah, we're looking, but the reality is you're not, we want this, everything with the bells and the whistles, and we want them for 100,000 when it's more like it's going to be 200,000. So I think there's a little bit of that. Is sort of, yeah, we are, we're looking. I think there's been a reluctance to go to search firms like mine and Susan's as well, and we're the experts in that field. I regularly speak to CMOs and CCOs who tell me that their in-house talent teams are wonderful at finding engineers at their engineering company or accountants at their at their accountancy business, but when it comes to the nuance of finding marketers or communicators, it's very, very different as well. So and that's a big frustration. But again, companies overspent in 2020 and 2021, particularly maybe in our world. I'm sure recruitment fees are through the roof, and CFOs probably were looking and going, well, why have we got this big talent team when and then we're going out to outside to find people as well. So I definitely think it's probably a smaller factor, but I definitely think that's happening. I definitely think that's happening as well. You only have to speak to people searching on LinkedIn about applying for jobs, never hearing back. Are they real jobs? I mean, I reached out to a friend who's a CCO of a big consulting firm yesterday. I said, what's this role? You haven't mentioned it to me. And he went, I didn't even know we were hiring for it. I think we filled it. And I think that, so there's these, it appears to be roles out there, but the reality is how real they are, or have they been filled, or will they ever be filled is the big question.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good question is, are people just sort of putting feelers out to see, can we get really great talent at a bargain price? I mean, to Susan's point of, there's a little bit of balance there between, what you're looking for and what you're willing to pay. And that may be causing some of these roles to just sit there until sort of a unicorn of a candidate kind of comes along.
Yeah.
But, we're seeing some pressure of unfilled roles, and also sort of a lot of budget pressure, I think, across the industry. Are we seeing a shift towards more upskilling versus hiring? Is that something that you guys are encountering?
I can't say that that's a trend for us, but I have heard anecdotally from individuals that they feel as if on the whole they're being asked to do more with less. And that even if they're growing, there will be a feeling of, I'm only allowed to hire one person for that area in the first instance, when you know very well that the questions from candidates will be, how big a team will I have? So I would say we have heard of a lot of situations where really quite senior roles, the client is saying, we need somebody who is hands-on and who can actually kick this off themselves, do the implementation and the execution, as well as strategy. So real jack of all trades requests. And frankly, even where there's a team, because perhaps the team is not as sophisticated as they want them to be, so they want player coaches. So, in a way that perhaps, diversity was the catchword a couple of years ago, I feel player coach is a big catchphrase at the moment. And it speaks to, we don't have a big enough team. You hear entrepreneurial is another word that you're going to hear, scrappy, even in very sophisticated organizations, which is so fascinating to me that, you've got these very sophisticated organizations that are essentially conservative by nature, but they want scrappy and entrepreneurial. So this wonderful sort of juxtaposition of ways of being.
I think, I haven't seen en masse upskilling. I'm sure it's happening. The only area, and it wouldn't be a panel if we didn't mention it, would be AI. There's certainly been a focus on getting existing employees to upskill there. But that leads on to the reason being is so those individuals can do more for less. That's what AI is seen to be. The great hope is that individuals, organizations, divisions can do, can upskill their AI capabilities, or bring that AI evangelist into the organization, and again do more for less. But that's probably the only area I'm seeing.
Interesting. Yes. Well, and we did make it almost 40 minutes in without anybody saying AI, which is kind of a miracle, even in a talent conversation, right? Because I think that AI is definitely impacting the types of roles that people are putting out there. But I do want to circle back on something Susan mentioned about this player coach sort of mentality, and that's something that a lot of organizations are looking for. So as job seekers, I think a lot of our members have sat more in the coach position, right? Have been seen as highly strategic within their organizations, as opposed to being executional. For either one of you, how would you advise someone to sort of present themselves or show their worth in that sense? If they're willing to be a player coach, but perhaps they have sat in more of those positions where they are more expected to sit on the strategy end versus the execution end of things.
I think one of the responses we hear to presenting a role that is more of a player coach, that I think is truly genuine in some cases, and a great one to borrow if it isn't, is that you actually miss that. That it's all very well to be managing a team, large or small, but that pulls you away from some of the things that you really love about your profession. And that if there's an opportunity, for some people, what I find is that they will actually lead with the degree to which they enjoy developing others, managing a team, and they perhaps won't even want a role if it is more of that sole contributor in the first instance. So I think really the most important thing is know yourself and be true to yourself, as opposed to selling yourself in. But if it is truly that you have come away from that level, and we have seen I've seen this a lot over the years, and in, even when I was doing financial services search, individuals who would say, I really loved it when, I've seen people be moved into leadership roles who have told me I should never, ever have been, given this opportunity. I really was just in the right place at the right time, and I did the biggest deals, so they made me the global head of M&A. The people who really, truly enjoy that work, I would encourage them to continue to do that work as opposed to being the play coach. And I think there are others who genuinely do like really being in the weeds, not micromanagers, but people who really enjoy being with the team and developing the team while doing the job, managing small teams in smaller organizations or parts of organizations.
Absolutely. And I think that's good advice to really think, especially for the job seekers, to think through, do you really want that role? There are ways to present yourself for that role, but is that what you really want? Or do you want to be in charge of team development and strategy? And that's kind of where you want to sit. I think it's a good question. I know we have one more section here where Alyssa's gonna share some of our findings here. We talked about quite a few different things and how it's not just about the money. There are kind of a lot of different reasons that people accept jobs or want to move jobs. And I think that that's come through really strongly this year, Alexa, probably more strongly than I think it has in the past.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this slide really reflects some of the aspects that Jamie and Susan were talking about earlier around those softer benefits and some of those most important factors when selecting an employer. One of the interesting trends that we seen for the first time this year is how corporate culture has actually overtaken flexible working in terms of being kind of, aside from compensation and salary, one of the most important factors. We saw it sort of leap from 46% importance to 56%, overtaking flexible working. So we thought that was really interesting. I mean, having said that, flexible working is still obviously still really important, and actually it's the preferred working arrangement for our members, despite a lot of companies, calling for that return to the office. I think also it's reflected in how employers are making up for some of that lack of wage growth. So, we're seeing that flexible working, things like workplace recognition, executive exposure, personal branding, really sort of there in the top 5 things that they're promoting to help combat some of that wage stagnation that we've talked about before.
Really interesting. And I think it's especially interesting that we've seen the idea of culture kind of leapfrog flexible working, which flexible working is a very tangible, you can, as we've enumerated on this webinar, you can sort of say, here are the reasons I need to work in a flexible way. Culture is a much softer thing, but I'm curious, Jamie, I'll start with you on this one. Why do you think we've seen corporate culture kind of come more into the limelight recently?
Well, it could be a scaling back of the flexibility as well. That certainly could be a reason. I also think that businesses have put more emphasis on it. If they're going to demand people come back into the office, they've got to give people a reason to be back in the office, rather than just saying because. So I certainly think that's very, very important. And then the retention of staff, again, I think a lot of people were burned in after the Great Resignation or during the Great Resignation of just people moving, after 6 months, a year, that just became the norm. That just became the norm for a while. So I think a lot of companies took stock of that, and then through exit interviews, through their own research, probably established that there were some probably key themes why people were moving on and trying to address them. And then it's that general trend. It might have rolled back a little bit, just to be more acknowledging people's mental health, and acknowledging that being in the office and the corporate culture is a big part of people's lives as well. So they have to address that. So I think it's a combination of factors, which is a reaction to the factors that we saw after the pandemic, return to office, Great Resignation, inflation, economy, all the pretty crazy things that have happened in the last 4 or 5 years to employees as well. So I think a combination of factors.
Absolutely. And what are you seeing, Susan, in terms of first off, why people are looking for culture, what they're looking for when they say they're looking for culture? When someone says, I really care about corporate culture, what does that mean in today's world?
Do you know, I think the most interesting observation I have made in the last year has been that it is about the way that the organization is making decisions, the way that leadership is thinking about the future of the organization. So, for example, I think we've been able to move people who would otherwise be extraordinarily happy. They've listened to one opportunity in the way that organization would onboard them and what they wanted from them out of the first 6 months, and then how they were thinking about the future and what the whole task was, versus the ways that their current organization were thinking about similar issues. So that might be one thing, that actually what corporate culture is the way that an organization is managed. There are so many ways that we can define corporate culture, right? But that to me has been one of the ones where I thought, oh, of course, in the end, who are our leaders and what are they deciding to do and how are they deciding to do it? So that I can have a role that is in direct conflict with the way that the organization is being run culturally by the leadership. And my role is communications and marketing. And it's awfully difficult to align with that. That could be a huge part of it. So it's not just about what's the sort of grand milieu in which I'm swimming around in terms of corporate culture, but rather how am I aligning with the way that the organization is running itself and performing in the world. The other really interesting thing that I heard, which I fear I might be jumping ahead a little bit on this, but one of the things I've heard is that as much as people might want to not be in the office, I've heard a couple of leaders say one of the reasons that we can't get the exposure to the stakeholders, internal stakeholders that we want, is because we're not here 5 days a week. We're only here 3 days a week, and there are so many internal stakeholders and only so many of us. And actually, this is a marketing and communications function, an integrated marketing and communications function. And for them, they have ended up doubling their size. And part of that is because they're not in the office as often as they used to be. So they need to be more people connecting with more stakeholders more frequently. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yes. So they need the marketing and comms function to sort of fill that gap of culture that sort of exists when you don't have everybody physically together. That's interesting. That's really interesting. And for our audience members, in just a moment, we're going to take questions. So if you want to start putting your questions into the Q&A section, it should be just to the right-hand side of your screen. But we're going to stick on culture for another minute. I'm curious. Hiring organizations often try to present themselves in certain ways. They're trying to sort of message about who they are, and employer branding has become more of a trend. So how are hiring organizations talking about corporate culture? Are they talking about, we do a monthly happy hour, or do they talk, to Susan's point about how are things going to be aligned with your personal values or your function within the organization? Jamie, I'll start with you here.
Yeah, I think that used to be corporate culture was, you had sort of Thursday happy hour, and you played like a dodgeball game or something like that, once, a summer barbecue or something like that. But and to both of your points as well, culture is a very tricky thing to define, and my idea of perfect culture might be someone else's, the antithesis of that as well. But I do think from my perspective, companies talk about that. But I think what I think they talk about is how, or try to imply, is the value that they give to an employee, or a future employee. I think how much they value, and how much, and then also how much influence that you can have in that culture as well. I think those are two real key points that people or hiring people or managers talk about. So it's, how much am I going to be valued in this organization? How much do you, how much focus will there be on me, whether that's my, my training and development, whether that's my access to stakeholders, whether that's my my growth path, and then also how much influence do I have within this organization as well, and that's not just what culture I'm talking about, it's just, but does my opinion matter? Can I push the needle? Can I make changes here? Do you listen? Or is there an opportunity to voice opinion as well? So I think whilst that's kind of it's less tangible than you get free drinks from 5 o'clock onwards on a Thursday, but I do think those are fundamentally what people are looking for, is am I valued and can I influence within this organisation? Do I have a voice?
Absolutely. And Susan, how are you seeing companies' message around this to try and communicate? If people care about culture, you've got to communicate it somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone's absolutely right. I think it is incredibly difficult, but I do think it all comes down to. So one of the things we heard recently was an organisation saying we're not getting our messages out quickly enough. Things are happening. We need to let our employees know how we stand in relation to those events. Economically, from a business perspective, but then also from a values perspective. And there was a feeling of, if we haven't got a message out within an hour or so, we've already missed the opportunity to shape to shape opinion, to reassure our employees. And we need to be seen to be super responsible and super responsive. So a transparent of sort of responsibility and generosity in that regard, I felt. I think that the other thing that we've heard a lot about is being able to help, especially in large organizations where there are sort of different individuals involved in a chain of events that serve a customer, that what we're hearing is that it becomes increasingly important that it is communicated to the person at the end of that chain why they're doing what they're doing, how it serves the organization, and then how it in turn serves the customer. So, how do I matter in the equation? How does my job matter? I think that's something that communications understands, marketing understands, but has responsibility for helping the rest of the organization understand, and that can really help to change culture, where everybody feels that they're really part of something and they're pulling together. There are obviously organizations and individuals who know about that way better than we do, but we do hear, a little bit about that. The other thing I hear quite a bit of at the moment is the degree to which CEOs are trying to minimize the number of direct reports that they have. And I would say that what we're hearing is it's, in some cases, this is fantastic, that it's so that they can actually be out talking to customers and internal stakeholders, individuals within the organization, helping with that culture, which goes back to my point about, ultimately it comes down to leadership.
Interesting. Well, I know we had a couple of other topics we wanted to talk about, but I'm going to switch just for a second over to one of our audience members' questions. And Alexa, this one is for you. They were asking about the findings in the US versus the UK and how you're finding this to be a different responses. And I know, of course, across the board, we see UK salaries are generally lower than US salaries. But beyond the salaries themselves, what differences or similarities did we find?
So I think the findings between the UK and the US were relatively consistent. We had a much smaller sample size within the UK, so it was hard for us to sort of look at that in a lot of detail in terms of some of the differences. But certainly kind of one of the biggest kind of differences was around salaries. So essentially looking at, kind of the level of bonuses and salaries were much lower in the UK, as we would have expected. But generally speaking, relatively consistent across both markets. Yeah,
that's great. I think and I don't find that to be terribly surprising. I think a lot of the same priorities are kind of hitting on both sides of the pond there. So we'll do a quick lightning round here. So you can see there's a download the full report there, scrolling across the bottom of your screen if you're ready to get in and download it. If you're a member, if you're not a member, apply for membership, and that way you can download it that way. But I'm going to do a quick lightning round with Jamie and Susan here. What's the most important piece of advice you would give to organizations who are hiring today?
I mean, it's always my advice, but whether it's just those amber flags that you ignored will come back to bite you. It's always the way. Because you want to push people through. You see, you see the personality-wise you buy in, but those things that you ignored normally always come back to bite you. So try not to ignore them.
Susan, what do you think?
Oh, gosh, I think that in the context of this conversation, it's about balancing the care for the success of the business with the care for the individual. That it's an incredibly difficult balance to strike, but that we shouldn't stop trying to strike it. It's a difficult one, and then that really is when you're sort of thinking of yourself as a leader in an organization or being the organization. And I think when you think about yourself as the individual, then I think you've got to balance sort of finding the place for you that is a bit of a stretch, but not too much of a stretch, and then that there's just sort of a certain level of certainty, but not too much. You're not going to get you don't want to get complacent. We sometimes hear people who say went to work somewhere where there were really nice people and the leadership really understands communications and basically goes through wanting every box to be ticked versus wanting to be in an organization and help to make that organization better. And invariably, we're looking for people who can help to make organizations better than they are currently. So I think looking for how you can make a difference is an important part. What's your unique skill that you can bring to an organization that'll be a direct match for where they're trying to get to next?
Absolutely. Thank you all for this wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. I actually wish we had another 15 minutes because I have more questions, but we're going to have to close it up here. Special thanks to Opinium. Their research capabilities, their abilities to find insights within data are just tremendous. So thank you, Alexa. Jamie and Susan, I absolutely love talking to the two of you. You have so much sort of purview over what's happening within the industry, and it really helps to wrap our heads around what both employers and employees should be thinking about as we move forward. For those who want the report, obviously click on the download full report that's scrolling under here. Also, if you filled in the survey, that will be in your inbox within the next few hours, so you won't even have to click the download button. That will be in your inbox if you filled in the survey. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to email us. There's a lot of data that has not been presented here that we have more information if you need it. So thank you all so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.